The stagecoach creaked to a halt in front of a worn sign that read, Willow Creek, Pop, 412. Dust swirled in the summer wind, and the sun cast long golden rays across the hills. From inside the coach, a modest woman stepped down carefully. Her black dress faded from time and travel. Her hands were calloused, her eyes strong but tired. Her name was Clara Wynne, and she had come farther than anyone could see. She carried a satchel, a cast-iron skillet wrapped in cloth, and a folded letter offering her a position as cook and housekeeper on a ranch 12 miles outside town. The letter was brief, written by a man named Thomas Garrison, a widower with 6 children. Clara was a widow herself, no longer young, no longer dreaming, just surviving. The town seemed to hesitate around her. People watched from porches and storefronts. She nodded politely, kept walking. No one came to meet her, but she didn't expect much. Just a chance to work, a chance to be useful again. She found the stable boy, rented a mule cart, and after a long, jolting ride under the setting sun, Clara reached the Garrison Ranch. It was quiet. Too quiet. The yard was littered with old toys. A broken wheelbarrow leaned against the barn. Chickens scattered as the cart stopped. The ranch house stood tall and weathered, like a man who once stood proud but no longer bothered straightening his shoulders. The front door opened slowly. A man in his late 30s stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sleeves rolled and hands rough from labor. His eyes, tired but honest, met hers. "Mrs. Wynne?" he asked. She nodded. "Clara, I'm Thomas Garrison. You came." He stepped aside. "Come in, ma'am." The house smelled faintly of ash and old coffee. A little girl peeked from behind the stairs. Another child sat at the table, swinging his legs, silent but curious. The others were somewhere in the house, 6 in total, Thomas had said, ages from toddler to teen. "You'll have your own room. Cook what you can with what we've got. They ain't picky. Haven't had a real meal in, well, since she passed," he said, eyes flicking to the cold hearth. "I'll do my best," Clara replied gently. He paused. "That's more than we've had in a long time." That night, she made cornbread and vegetable stew from scraps in the pantry. It wasn't much, but the smell alone brought 3 of the children down from upstairs. A boy even smiled. One of the littler ones whispered to her, "You smell like cinnamon." When the children went to bed, Thomas lingered by the door. "You didn't have to bake bread, too." "I did, because they needed to smell something warm." He nodded, slow. "Thank you." Clara smiled faintly. "Let's just see if I last through the week." Neither of them knew that something had already shifted. Not in words, but in the silence between them. A feeling of something old and good trying to return. A home waiting to be rebuilt. The next morning began before the sun crested the hills. Clara was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, apron tied. She moved like a woman who'd done this her whole life. Not rushing, not dawdling. She knew the rhythm of a quiet house before it woke. She lit the stove, stirred the coals back to life, and cracked eggs into a pan as the smell of coffee began to rise. Outside the window, the Garrison land stretched far. Wide fields, a leaning barn, a fence line that hadn't been mended in a while. It looked like a place where time had paused after grief arrived. The children began to drift in one by one, still blinking sleep from their eyes, but drawn to the kitchen like moths to warmth. "Morning, ma'am," mumbled the eldest, a tall, thin boy named Eli, about 16, with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes. "Good morning," Clara replied, placing a plate in front of him. "Eat before it gets cold." By the time Thomas came down, the table was full, not just with food, but with something else, too. Noise, laughter, light. He stood in the doorway, watching as his children, who had grown quiet since their mother passed, asked for seconds, squabbled over who got the last biscuit, and even teased one another like old times. "Didn't expect this," he muttered. Clara glanced over her shoulder. "Children grow on warmth, not just food, real warmth." Thomas cleared his throat and nodded. "You've done more in a day than I have in months." Clara didn't answer. She just kept stirring. Later that afternoon, Clara started organizing the pantry. It was in poor shape. Half-rotted potatoes, dusty cans, bags left open for mice. She hummed softly as she cleaned, something calm and steady from a time long ago. Little Maisie, the second youngest, stood near the door. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked in a whisper. Clara turned, surprised. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Maisie looked at the floor. "The last lady they brought here. She only stayed 2 days. Said we were too wild. Clara knelt. Well, I don't scare easy, and I've got strong arms for strong work. Maisie blinked, then did something Clara hadn't expected. She hugged her, quick and fierce, before running back upstairs. Clara stayed kneeling for a moment, holding the air like it still held the little girl's warmth. That evening, Thomas walked in from the fields with his hat in hand. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired a man carries in his bones, not just his shoulders. Dinner smells like a dream, he said. You look like you need to sit more than you need to speak, Clara replied, handing him a cup of coffee. He sat. For a while, neither said anything, but in the quiet, there was peace. Later that night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair in the candlelight. She looked at the worn brush, her hands, her reflection in the old mirror nailed to the wall. I'm not just a cook, she whispered to herself, and they're not just a job. Outside her room, she could hear giggles from upstairs, the soft thump of boots on the wood floor, and Thomas's low voice saying lights out. But there was no sharpness to it, only care. Something had started to bloom in that house. Something no one dared name yet, but it was growing all the same. 3 days passed, and by the 4th, Clara had memorized every creaky floorboard, every mismatched plate, and the name of every chicken in the coop, thanks to 7-year-old Noah, who insisted she address them properly when gathering eggs. She never questioned it. There was comfort in rhythm, the chopping, the stirring, the folding of laundry with small sleeves and too many holes. Clara moved through the house like someone returning to a life once known. Not hers, perhaps, but something close. She'd begun sewing patches on the children's clothes at night, after they slept. She didn't ask for more pay. She just saw what needed doing. That afternoon, the clouds began rolling in. A hard gray covered the skies, swallowing the warmth. Wind danced with dust across the open plains. Clara stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched Thomas ride in. You'd better bring that laundry in, he called. We've got a storm coming. She nodded and stepped down without a word, already gathering linens from the line. By the time the first drops fell, the house smelled of rain, wood smoke, and cinnamon muffins still warm in the oven. The children huddled near the windows, wide-eyed. Thunder rolled low. When the wind howled louder, little Noah began to cry. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled him into her arms and whispered, It's just the sky rumbling. Same way your belly rumbles when you skip lunch. He let out a tearful laugh, snuggling into her. In the corner, Eli watched her. Not like a child watches an adult, but like a boy quietly judging whether someone's going to stay or vanish. That night, with the storm tapping on the roof like impatient fingers, they all gathered near the hearth. Thomas had lit a small fire, and the younger children curled under blankets. Clara told a story. Nothing grand. Just a memory of her own childhood, catching fireflies and making wishes in mason jars. It wasn't about the story itself. It was about the sound of her voice, soft and steady. About how the thunder outside was slowly forgotten. At one point, Thomas leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but he wasn't looking at the fire. He was watching Clara. Later, after the storm had passed and the fire dimmed, Thomas walked her to the stairs. You didn't have to do all that, he said. Clara looked at him, calm as ever. They were afraid, so I gave them something else to listen to. He nodded, quiet, then added, I think they like you. I like them too. He hesitated. I don't want to get in the way, but if you ever need something, I'll ask, she interrupted gently. But you don't have to worry, Mr. Garrison. I came here to cook, but I'm not blind to what this house really needs. He raised an eyebrow. And what's that? She gave a soft smile. Hope. Then she turned and climbed the stairs, one careful step at a time, leaving behind a man who'd forgotten what hope sounded like. Until now. The storm passed, but something lingered in its wake. A new stillness, not of silence, but of settled breath. The ranch seemed to exhale. That morning, Clara found a flower placed on her folded apron, a wild daisy, clumsily picked, its stem bent. She held it gently, no note needed. Her guess? Maisie or Noah, maybe both. She pinned it to her collar and wore it all day. The days unfolded with quiet purpose. Clara taught 11-year-old Abigail how to knead bread. She sat with the twins, Beth and Ben, while they clumsily stitched hand towels for the kitchen. She even convinced Eli, the stoic eldest, to help her build a wooden shelf for spices. Thomas watched all of this without interfering. He fixed fences, hauled feed, and came in each night to meals he hadn't asked for, and a home that no longer felt haunted. One evening, after supper, Eli approached Clara while she washed dishes. My ma used to sing, he said suddenly, when she cooked. Clara turned gently. Did you have a favorite? He shrugged. I don't know. I think it was something about riverboats. She dried her hands. Next time you remember a line or two, tell me. He gave the faintest smile. Okay. Then, without another word, he walked out into the night air. But Clara stood still, touched by a moment she knew had cost him something to give. 1 week in, and the air between Clara and Thomas had shifted. He wasn't a man of words. He didn't compliment or explain, but he started showing up in the kitchen early, offering to chop wood, to bring in water, to fix the loose step she'd nearly tripped on. They didn't speak much, but when they did, the conversation always lingered just a moment longer than needed. You're quiet, Mr. Garrison, she said once, glancing up from her stew. He gave a half-smile. So are you. I talk with the children. I listen. She tilted her head. That you do. That Sunday, they all walked to the little white church in town. Clara had pressed the children's clothes and tied bows in the girls' hair. The pews creaked under their weight as they filed in. Thomas at the end, the children between, and Clara near the aisle. People stared, not with cruelty, but with curiosity. Whispers buzzed like flies, but no one said a word to their faces. After service, the pastor's wife approached Clara gently. They seem happier, she said, nodding at the children. That's got something to do with you, I expect. I just cook and sweep, Clara replied. The woman smiled kindly. Sometimes that's all it takes. Back at the ranch, after the children had gone to bed, Thomas stepped out onto the porch where Clara sat mending socks under the moonlight. I know it's not much, he said, voice low, but I'm grateful. She looked up. For supper? For everything. For making this house feel full again. Clara studied him for a beat. I didn't come here to fill a space, Thomas. I came to live in one. For the first time, he looked right at her. Not past her, not through her, but at her. There was something unspoken between them, fragile but real. But then I hope, he said slowly, you'll stay long enough to keep doing that. She nodded. I just might. The ranch, once filled with quiet grief and dust, now hummed with the music of ordinary life. Morning chores were no longer solitary. Clara taught the children how to sweep the porch properly, how to fold blankets with care, how to gather eggs without cracking them. The work became less about the task and more about doing it together. Even Thomas began to notice how much easier the days felt. I haven't had help in the fields like this since... He trailed off one afternoon, watching Eli carry a sack of feed alongside little Ben, both sweaty but laughing. Since before everything got hard? Clara asked gently. He nodded. Well, it's still hard, she said, looking out toward the fields. But now it doesn't feel so lonely. He looked at her then, like he wanted to say something more, but words failed him. Instead, he tipped his hat and got back to work. Clara understood. Some things didn't need to be said, not yet. One evening, Clara found a drawing on her pillow. 6 stick-figure children stood around a taller woman with brown curls. Above it, in messy crayon handwriting, were the words, We want you to stay. She sat on her bed, holding the paper like it was made of gold. No one signed it, but she knew exactly who had. The next day, something unusual happened. Thomas asked her to ride with him into town. I need to trade for supplies, he said. Could use a second pair of eyes. Clara hesitated. You sure the children will be all right? Eli's near grown, he said, and they listen to you better than they listen to me anyway. She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. Give me a minute to fix my hair. The ride into town was quiet at first. The wagon creaked over dry soil, and the wind smelled of sagebrush and coming rain. But gradually the silence between them softened. Thomas told her about the ranch, how he'd built it with his father's hands, how everything seemed to fall apart after his wife passed. I didn't know how to raise 6 kids alone, he said quietly. I still don't. You're not alone now, Clara replied. He glanced sideways at her. You planning to stay? She didn't answer right away. I was hired to cook. That's not what I asked. Clara turned toward him. Then no, I don't plan to just cook. A flicker of a smile tugged at his mouth. He let the reins rest loose in his hands. At the general store, Thomas picked up nails, sugar, and lamp oil. Clara chose cinnamon, dried apples, and, without saying a word, a small tin of blue ribbon. He didn't ask what it was for. But later, when Maisie came running down the stairs with her braids tied up in bows, Thomas couldn't help but chuckle. She looks like her ma used to, he murmured. Clara only smiled, hiding her emotion behind a dish towel. That night, the children put on a play in the living room. A chaotic, giggling mess of made-up roles using bed sheets as costumes and pots as helmets. Thomas sat in the rocker, Clara beside him on a small stool. Neither spoke as they watched, but the warmth between them filled the space like a second fire. "Don't think I've laughed like this in years," Thomas admitted. Clara didn't look at him. That's what happens when children feel safe. And when someone gives them a reason to. This time he was looking straight at her, and she looked back. No words were exchanged after that, but something deeper than words settled between them. A promise not yet spoken, but well on its way. The days stretched long beneath the early summer sun, and Clara found herself not counting them anymore. She had stopped thinking of her room as the guest room. She had started keeping a jar of buttons in the kitchen drawer. She had begun humming while she worked, songs she hadn't sung since before her husband passed. The Garrison house was no longer simply a ranch. It had become a home, but peace doesn't arrive without testing. One morning, as Clara scrubbed the porch steps, a wagon rolled up the drive, unannounced. Its arrival was slow, deliberate. The man driving it was sharp-jawed, clean-shaven, and wore a jacket too fine for the prairie heat. Clara stood slowly, drying her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man tipped his hat. "Name's Roy Mather. I'm from Missouri. I was told a Mrs. Clara Wynne was working here." She blinked, stunned. "That's me." Thomas stepped out from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. "You know him?" Clara's voice was quiet. "I did. A long time ago." Roy looked between them. "Mind if we talk, Clara?" They sat beneath the shade tree, just out of earshot from the house. Thomas stayed close enough to watch, far enough to respect. "You disappeared," Roy said, voice tinged with something between guilt and disappointment. "No letter. No goodbye. Folks thought you'd gone mad." Clara's eyes hardened slightly. "I buried a husband, lost a home, and nearly lost myself. I had nothing left to say." He sighed. "Clara, your sister's been looking for you. She's in Springfield now, settled with her husband. She asked me to come find you." Clara stared past him toward the house. "I have a place now." Roy followed her gaze. "As a hired cook?" "No," she said firmly. "As something more. I've got children who trust me, a man who respects me, a table I belong at." He raised his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to tell you that you're missed, and to remind you, you've got family if you ever want it." Clara's voice softened. "I have family, Roy. I just found them somewhere no one expected." Later that evening, after Roy had ridden off without ceremony, Clara found Thomas fixing the fence again, as he often did when emotions ran too close to the surface. "I hope you don't think less of me," she said quietly. He looked up, confused. "Why would I?" "Because there are parts of my life I don't talk about, parts I don't wear openly." Thomas leaned against the post. "Everyone's carrying something, Clara. But I don't care about what you've run from. I care about what you've brought here." She blinked back the sudden sting in her eyes. "And what's that?" He gave a small smile. "Laughter, light, grace. Good food helps too." Clara laughed, the tension lifting. "You're not the only one with ghosts," Thomas added. "But you've made it easier to live with mine." That night, Clara tucked the children in, same as always. But when she passed Eli's door, he called out, "That man earlier, he from before?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Are you leaving?" Clara stepped inside, sat at the edge of his bed. "No, Eli, I'm not going anywhere." "Good," he muttered, turning to the wall. "We'd miss you too much." Her hand rested lightly on the blanket at his shoulder. "I'd miss you more." Outside, the wind carried a chill, but inside the house the warmth held, stronger than ever. Clara knew now. She hadn't just found refuge. She had found roots. By the time July arrived, the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost sacred. Mornings were filled with fresh bread, laughter, and chores done with teamwork rather than orders. Evenings brought stories under oil lamps, fireflies blinking outside the windows, and the soft rise and fall of children's breathing through thin wooden walls. But something deeper, quieter, had begun to stir beneath the surface. Clara had grown used to the way Thomas paused in doorways before speaking, as if tasting the words before offering them. He'd grown used to the scent of cinnamon trailing after her in every room. The house that once echoed with loss now carried the weight of something gentler. Hope. One afternoon, after Thomas and Eli returned from the far pasture, Clara handed them lemonade and sat with them on the porch. Eli excused himself first, leaving the two of them in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Thomas cleared his throat. "Children won't stop talking about your peach pie." "Well," Clara smiled, "they do most of the peeling. I just make sure it doesn't burn." He chuckled, then looked out across the land. "I always thought, after Margaret passed, that maybe this place was cursed, that nothing good could grow here again." She was quiet, letting him speak. "But it wasn't the land," he said softly. "It was me. I let everything stop living. You came along and reminded us how to breathe again. Clara's voice trembled just slightly.
You didn't make anything die, Thomas. Grief does that. It dries everything out, but it doesn't mean life can't return.
He turned to her fully now. You've given us more than meals, Clara. You've given us a second chance. She blinked slowly. I didn't know I still had anything left to give. But you, and your children, pulled something out of me I thought was gone. Thomas reached over and for the first time placed his rough hand gently over hers. It was not a grand gesture. It was quiet, real, steady. You're part of this place now, whether you meant to be or not. She didn't move her hand away. Then I think I'd like to stay, if that's all right. He nodded. It's more than all right. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the children put on another little show. This time, a wedding play. Ben wore a vest 5 sizes too big. Beth used a curtain sash as a veil. Noah officiated while Maisie clutched a dandelion bouquet. Clara sat on the floor beside Thomas, her shoulder brushing his. The children giggled and danced and made wild declarations like, I promise to share my cornbread forever. When it ended, Thomas leaned close, murmuring, if they're trying to tell us something. Clara smiled. They've always been a little ahead of us. That night before she went to bed, Clara passed Thomas by the stairs. You know, she said gently, I think I was waiting for someone to choose me again. But maybe the truth is, I needed to choose myself first. He looked at her, deep and steady. Then I'm just glad I was here when you did. The days turned golden with late summer light, and Clara noticed the small things more than ever. Noah's missing front tooth, Maisie's habit of humming while she tied her shoes, the way Eli always checked the back door twice before bed, like he was guarding something precious. They weren't just details anymore. They were hers. And in the quiet moments, when the air was thick with crickets and the last warmth of day, Clara found herself thinking about what it meant to belong, not just to a place, but to people. One Saturday morning, Thomas brought in a surprise, a crate filled with fresh peaches from the neighbor's orchard. They said it was payment, he explained as he carried the crate to the kitchen. For what? Clara asked, wiping flour from her hands. Thomas looked at her with a glint of teasing in his voice. Apparently for getting their daughter to eat vegetables after she came here to play last week. Clara laughed, pulling out a peach. I'll make a cobbler, the big one. You always do. Their eyes met. That smile again. The one that started slow but stayed long after it faded. The cobbler baked as the sun climbed. Clara and the girls picked flowers in the meadow beyond the chicken coop. Ben and Noah tried to build a fort from firewood, while Eli helped Thomas oil the barn hinges. By supper time, the kitchen glowed like something sacred. Candlelight, warmth, and the scent of peach and cinnamon swirling together like memory. After the dishes were done and the children tucked in, Clara sat on the porch with Thomas again. It had become a kind of ritual. 2 people, 1 quiet night, and 1,000 unspoken truths hanging between them. I never knew stillness could feel this good, she said. He nodded. It does when someone's sitting beside you. Then, quietly, Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a leather pouch, carefully wrapped. He handed it to her. Clara looked at him, unsure. Go on, he said. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden pendant, shaped like a heart, with 6 notches along the edge. 1 for each child. I carved it years ago, he said. Didn't know what to do with it. Figured I'd never give it to anyone. Clara turned the piece over in her palm. Why now? Thomas looked down, his voice low but sure. Because you're not just part of this home, Clara. You're part of us. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the pouch and held it to her chest. I lost my whole world once, she whispered. Thought I'd never be brave enough to build another. Thomas reached over, took her hand in his, just like he had that day on the porch weeks ago. But this time, he didn't let go. You didn't rebuild it alone, he said. And then gently, without rush, without question, he kissed her. Not the kiss of young fire or uncertain hearts, but the kind that grows in quiet soil. Sure, steady, deep. When they pulled apart, the only sound was the wind in the grass and the soft creak of the rocker. I've waited a long time for a day like this, Clara said softly. So have I, Thomas replied. And I reckon we're just getting started. The morning after their kiss, nothing was said about it, but everything had changed. Thomas still drank his coffee on the porch. Clara still stirred the pot with her usual calm. The children still argued over the last biscuit, but in the way they looked at each other, in how their hands lingered when passing a plate or brushing against one another in the kitchen. The difference was undeniable. It was no longer a question of if Clara belonged. It was now a matter of when she would stop being called the cook and start being called Ma. One afternoon, Clara stood with Eli in the barn as he practiced replacing a hinge on the old stable door. "You've gotten strong," she said, holding the board steady. "Had to," he replied, shrugging. "Pa needed help." She tilted her head. "That doesn't mean you can't still be a boy now and then." He glanced up at her, serious. "We were falling apart before you came. I thought we were supposed to live that way, like things just stayed broken." Her heart caught. "You're allowed to grow again," she said gently. "Even broken trees put out new branches." Eli didn't say anything, but when he handed her the hammer, his hand didn't shake. And that was answer enough. That night, Clara and Thomas sat alone again, watching the stars. "I've been thinking," he said. Clara arched an eyebrow. "That's dangerous." He chuckled. "About building a new room." She looked at him. "For what?" "For you. So you're not upstairs by the pantry anymore." She paused. "You building it because you think I need more space? Or because I want you closer?" She met his gaze, steady, sure. "I don't need a room to feel close, Thomas." He leaned forward slightly. "But maybe, one day, a room that's ours." Clara's lips curled into a smile. "Maybe." The next Sunday at church, the Garrison family filled nearly an entire pew, Clara included. The townsfolk didn't whisper anymore. They smiled. After service, the pastor made his way to Thomas. "Folks are saying your ranch has come back to life." Thomas nodded. "Something like that." The pastor's wife turned to Clara and said warmly, "They say when a woman brings life back into a home, it's because her heart found room for it." Clara only smiled, holding Maisie's hand tight in her own. Back at the ranch, Thomas worked late fixing the pasture fence while Clara took the younger children out to pick wildflowers. Maisie ran ahead and shouted, "Let's bring some to Pa! He always smiles when you give him things." Clara laughed but paused, her eyes softening, because somewhere along the way, it had shifted. She was no longer someone who had lost everything. She had become someone who was building again. And in the center of that new life, 6 children and 1 quiet cowboy were waiting, not just for meals or chores or calm hands. They were waiting for something she had almost forgotten how to give. Forever. Clara stood in the kitchen as the sun peeked over the hills, casting golden light across the worn wooden floor. She could hear the house waking up, the soft thud of bare feet, the rustling of quilts, the quiet voices of children, already whispering. There was something different in the air that morning. Not the weather, not the chores, but something inside her. Peace. It wasn't loud. It didn't sing. It just was. And for a woman who had once believed her life had ended with her husband's passing, this peace was a miracle. Thomas walked in holding a tin box. "What's this?" Clara asked, drying her hands. He opened it carefully. Inside were tiny items: a thimble, a carved wooden horse, a ribbon, a dried flower. "Things they've given me over the years," he said. "Little pieces of them. Reminders of the good days." Clara looked up at him. "You've kept them all this time?" He nodded. "Now I think maybe I've got room in there for something else." She smiled, not asking what he meant. She already knew. That evening, after dinner and laughter and the usual small chaos, Thomas stood in the doorway of the kitchen as Clara wiped down the table. "I've been thinking," he began. "You do that a lot lately," she teased. He stepped closer, more serious than she expected. "About what we've become." Clara straightened. "Go on." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. Nothing fancy, just a band of silver with a faint engraving of vines and leaves. "It was my mother's," he said. "I've been carrying it around for a long time, not knowing who it was meant for next." Clara didn't speak. Her breath caught. "You don't have to answer now," he continued, his voice steady. "But I'd be proud, truly proud, if you'd be my wife." Tears welled in her eyes, not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty that had been building for weeks. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I've already chosen this place, these children, you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, the world went still. It wasn't fireworks or shouting or wild declarations. It was better. It was real. The children found out the next morning. Maisie burst into happy tears. Ben and Beth ran in circles, screaming, "Ma, Ma," while Noah made a sign out of wood that said Clara's house now and hammered it onto the chicken coop. Eli, as usual, said little, but hugged Clara longer than anyone else. And that night, for the first time, they all sat around the table, 7 children and 2 adults, not as broken parts, but as a whole. A family. As they bowed their heads for grace, Thomas cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd get to say this again," he said quietly,
his voice thick with emotion.
But thank you, Lord, for bringing Clara here, for bringing her home. And when Clara looked around at the mismatched plates, the chipped cups, the crumbs on the floor, and laughter spilling from every chair, she felt it in her bones. She was exactly where she was meant to be.